Everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Kate Garth, Customer Policy Manager at Empower, and I'm going to be talking you through energy tax simplification as much as possible. So this slide is just covering what I'm going to go through. So very quickly, because I hadn't realised the screen's quite small, so I will read it out as well. So introductions and recap and what was our red tape challenge. Simplification, well, what exactly does that mean? And I think that's a really valid question. Hopefully we'll get to the bottom of that. Government consultation, so this is the crux of the matter. What do we know about it? A short piece. What don't we know? I'm afraid it's a lot longer. And then what could this mean for you and your organisations? What the potential customer impacts could be and what you can do to prepare for it. So I hope that will cover what you're expecting to listen to. If that's not what you're expecting, I hope you'll enjoy it anyway. Okay, so, and obviously at the end, if you've got any questions, now appreciate this is at the after the lunch session, so if you want to ask questions as we go through, I'm happy with that as well. So make it useful for yourselves. That's the main thing. Okay. Right. So introductions and a recap. Well, where did this all come from? For those who've been involved in this industry, in particular who've been affected by CRC and other energy efficiency taxes and levies, I think it's not surprising that this has been going on for quite a long time and has had several changes and iterations. And I think the starting point for this was really back in 2010 when the coalition government came in. And I think it's worth just bearing in mind that the May election and when they finally decided on what the government was going to look like, CRC had only really been going about 2 months. So it wasn't really a very particularly auspicious start. The next thing I would say is that they motored on. I think to give them credit for the coalition government, they set out what they wanted to do. And 5 months after coming into power, they'd basically said, this new lovely CRC scheme, which has just come into effect, well, we're going to significantly change it, and any plans that you might have had to get your money back in terms of the revenue recycling through the Performance League table, sorry, that's not going to happen. We're using that money to offset the deficit and start paying down the UK's debts. So then the next thing I think that we need to just flag up is, sorry, that's revenue recycling came through. Oh, look at the wrong side. The government and Empower's red tape challenge. So in 2011, they were looking to see, well, how could they simplify all the regulations? It wasn't just energy; they were looking across government. And we at Empower decided that it was a very good challenge to make to work out, well, what could be improved, what's unnecessary. And the red tape challenge that we launched was trying to make sure that major energy users had the opportunity to get their views across to government. Now, it wasn't specifically about CRC; it was predominantly about EMR and what that might look like, but as you can imagine, there were quite a few comments that came back through CRC, and I just wanted to, I haven't got a copy of it, we did have a lovely big document that we stuck out, and there was a couple of comments in there in terms that came out of the round table, and I think just bearing in mind that this is almost 5 years ago now, we surveyed about 100 major energy users, and of those, 65%, and this is, 2011, 65% of them then said CRC needs to be simplified. 58% of them said they thought there should be changes made. And 35% at that time said CRC should be merged with other regulations. So I think the seeds were sown way back then, that there's changes that were going to need to happen. And lo and behold, a year later, in 2012, government did exactly that. They consulted on CRC and how they could simplify it. They didn't go at that stage to the point where they scrapped it, but they did make a lot of changes. They did make it simpler. And I think going from 28 fuels down to 2, that was simply just the first step. And they did make clear at that point in time they would be looking to review it back in 2016. And so they're almost doing it a year early. So I think credit to them. They realised there was a problem. They're trying to address it. And we are now here where we are. Not sure what that might mean. Okay, so then going forward, so as I said, there was the simplifications that came through from following on from that consultation in 2012. Predominantly, they changed the fuel mix. They changed how you would qualify. And they also changed so some of those changes came in the first phase, sort of mid-2013 in June, with the majority of the changes coming through in phase 2 in April 2014. They did make some additional changes, which was removing the requirement for the Met-Min sectors to come into CRC because they were no longer liable for CCL, and there was a concern that they would end up getting the charges that they hadn't actually banked on. So again, making the right moves and simplifying it. Then I think the next big change was, obviously this year in May, there was the election of the Conservative majority with a very different focus. And I think anyone who heard Andrea Leadsom this morning was making it clear, whilst the trilemma is still very much the key impact, possibly the focus on whether it's carbon reduction, whether it's affordability, security of supply. I think it would be fair to say that we're all seeing now the priorities have shifted, and it's very much about how do you deliver the security of supply, making it affordable for customers. And I think that's the prism that you've got to see these changes coming through, changes coming on. And then in July, they launched. So in July there was the budget. Now the budget had many issues in energy, which some of them were unexpected. I think the removal of changes to LEC and the productivity plan, which came out, I think it was 2 days after the budget, included the reference that they were then going to do this simplification in terms of all business energy efficiency taxes and the reporting framework. And so that's where they put it. This is what they were going to do. So as I say, it's 6 months earlier than was anticipated previously. And then a little bit later after that, end of September, they actually launched the consultation. So whilst it's been going on since July, and government has been engaging and did do a pre-consultation engagement with a lot of stakeholders and industry, the actual consultation only came out at the end of September. And it's still live, so if anyone hasn't responded to it yet, you do still have time. So, next slide. Simplification, what does this mean for you? Now, again, I know this is after lunch, so I thought we'd try and make sure that, you're all listening, for those who haven't got headphones on. So, just a quick straw poll, if you could please, humour me on this one. First of all, does everyone know about the consultation, the business energy efficiency landscape? Can you stick your hands up? Let's have a bit of action. Fantastic. Okay, right, hands down. How many of you have responded to that? Ooh. How many of you are intending to respond, because there are another 2 days? There's a few. Okay, right then. So my next question, how many of you are impacted by EU ETS? Oh, just a couple. Okay. If you can keep your hands up for now. How many of you participate in CRC? Oh, quite a few more. Okay. Right, hands down. How many of you have a climate change agreement? And very much want that to continue, I'm guessing. Okay. Okay, hands down. How many of you will have to do ESOS reporting, or an eligible ESOS participant? Only a couple of you. Hands up, hands up. Okay, and how many of you have done it? Or how many of you will be online to have got your submission done by the 5th of December? Oh, very good. I have to say that I was expecting it to be slightly less, so that's very good news. And lastly, the last question is, how many of you have ISO 50001 and are reporting? And of that, how many of you did it not to avoid, but see it as a benefit of ESOS? Right, okay. So for those if you can, when people had their hands up, I think it's clear that there's an awful lot of stuff which is going to affect an awful lot of you. And therefore, your implication of what simplification might mean could be very different. So thank you for that and for listening and to showing everyone. So simplification, what does it mean for you? Well, I think what we think it should mean for us is that, as you can see, and I'll explain this bit in a minute, it should result in a more efficient and cost-effective processes for both administration and compliance. It's got to be easier, and it's got to be cheaper, and it's got to actually deliver something meaningful for you. It also needs to provide the right signals to drive investment in energy efficiency and carbon reduction. Because really, if you're doing the reporting for your organisation to highlight where you could make some savings, where those efficiencies are, it's got to be clear and understandable. You shouldn't just be doing it as a tick box exercise. And then finally, it's got to drive cost efficiencies for all parties. So it's got to not be overcomplicated. And I think, looking back, having seen CRC since its inception back in, I think, 2006, 2007, when it was just a dream on a piece of paper, it was quite a straightforward plan initially. And then they realised, well, you do something, it's going to impact one group of customers, so we need to have another little bit of legislation to affect that. And what we ended up with is a bit of a sprawling monster, and it was so overcomplicated. And I completely and genuinely agree that it's not surprising people didn't like it, and not surprising that they want to simplify it. But it was a monster of our own creation. So I think what we need to make sure now is that the new system, the new framework, however it looks in the future, is designed to be fit for purpose. We can't just try and shoehorn new policies into existing ones, and we can't just assume the output for one will be fit for purpose for a different reason, because I think what we've learned is that's not the case. Now, on a couple of the slides you'll see, and you can't read it because it's going to be too small, but there are little blue boxes where we did a quick survey on our customer panel just to try and work out, well, what do our customers think about the consultation? Because it's a difficult consultation, I think, to respond to, because there's very little detail, there's no costs. And some of the comments we got back were very, were absolutely on the nail. And so if you can't read it, what it says on this one, it says many areas of business energy tax crossover, and in some cases it feels like duplicate information is needed to be provided, which is both time consuming and mundane. And I thought, what a brilliant comment, because it is. It's, you've got to gather this data, you've got to do something with it. But if you're not doing anything which provides additional benefit for you, then it's just a waste of time and cost and resource. So hopefully for us, simplification, what it would mean, it would just avoid that in future. And I hope that's something when you do respond to the consultation that will be coming across loud and clear. So, the consultation itself. So, as I say, it was published in late September, and it does close on Monday at quarter to midnight, 11:45. So you do still have time. So, if following this seminar you feel the urge to get some comments down, please do. Government has said it's expecting to publish its outcome, its official government response, and the next steps in the March 2016 budget. DEC and Treasury and HMRC, who we've been engaging with, have indicated that one of the reasons it was such a short consultation, it's only 6 weeks, is that they are hoping to get some of the high-level responses or outcomes into the spending review announcements, which will come out at the end of November. Now, I'm not sure whether that will be possible, because really there's not that much time between now and, publishing a policy, but it might just give an indication of that. What they have also said is, although the announcement's going to be coming out in the March budget, they are intending again to do more pre-consultation or pre-engagement before the announcement. So if you do have any points, because as I've gone through the consultation, I thought, oh my goodness, I haven't thought of that. That's another thing. It's not all over, that's what I'd like to say. There's definitely another chance to engage, to get those views across, because I think on some of the issues in the consultation, they are pretty clear what they're going to do. Others, I think it's not been thought through enough to work out what it will actually mean and how it can be delivered. So I think there is definitely scope for change. The consultation, for those who've read it and responded, will be fully aware that there is no impact assessment yet. And I think this is the biggest problem with the consultation, that there's no way to work out how much will it cost, what the benefits are in terms of reducing compliance and administration costs. Well, we know how much are they expecting to save and how much will other costs come in, because if you make this such of a wholesale change, and it will be a big change for those who are impacted, there are going to be costs, so have they worked it out? What's the evidence base for it? The consultation was, as I say, announced as part of the productivity plan, which was led by the BIS team under Sajid Javid. And it is clear that encouraging UK investment is going to be a high priority. So what we want to make sure from our perspective, and obviously from your perspective as customers, is that it does actually lead to that outcome, that you are actually able then to put the investment into energy efficiency, into carbon reduction, and you've got that clarity and certainty going forward, because what we don't want is to see it all chopping and changing again in a few years' time and people worried about that and therefore not investing. Okay. The key principles that they've outlined throughout the consultation is that they are planning on introducing a single tax and a single reporting framework, however that works out. And obviously there's no impact assessment and they don't actually know how it's going to work, so the devil will be in the detail. And this is just, I suppose, my worry bead, is that we don't know how it will actually be implemented. I think some of the changes they can make could be done quite quickly, and then it's just the question of, well, how do you untangle what you've currently got, because it's a very big policy change that they are that they're considering going forward with. And personally, for myself, I'd like to see those costs, and I'd like to know when it was going to happen so you can start to plan accordingly. So that's the overview. So what do we know? Right. I think the big headline one, and as I say, if you remember the slide which was looking about, well, what's the context? Treasury is, I think, you can read into this what you want, but they are going to get rid of CRC. I think that's pretty much a given. But they are still going to keep the money. And the money, I've not been able to bottom it out. I've spoken to Treasury and I've spoken to DEC and I've spoken to BIS, and I've said, what is your level of revenue that you're trying to get back? And I've not had a same answer yet. So the latest figures I was given on Monday it's about 800 million revenue from CRC. So that's what I'm going with now. So if it changes, then I apologise. It could go up and could go down, because that's based on current costs. In the consultation, the Treasury, because it's a Treasury-run consultation, they did set out four key things that they wanted to make sure. And the top one, rightly or wrongly, is that basically any change has got to be revenue neutral for government. So that they are going to get their money, it'll be simplified and there'll be savings, but they're still going to get their revenues coming in. So don't be assuming that it's going to lead to lower costs for you, because it might not. The second objective that they had was it's got to simplify and reduce the compliance and administrative costs, which you said obviously completely support, and that does need to happen. And that should be facilitated or helped through having just a single reporting scheme and single energy tax. So you are just doing one set of reports. The big job is gathering the data and then actually doing the analysis on that data and doing something useful with it. The key thing shouldn't just be constantly re-entering the data on the Environment Agency website. The third thing that they wanted to make sure is that they protect energy-intensive business at risk of carbon leakage, which again is absolutely critical. I think if anyone heard the panel discussions this morning and the impacts on the large users in terms of the electricity costs, it's absolutely a crucial decision. Stuff that's going on at the moment, particularly with the steelworks, it's just bringing it home. There has to be something done. And, they are clear that's what they're going to do. But just the question is, are you an energy intensive, and are you an energy intensive that matches their belief? So currently you're protected through, if you've got a CCA, you're protected through that, but you've got to wonder, are you feeling lucky? Is your CCA one of the ones that's going to remain? Are they going to broaden out the scope? Are they going to change it? Because they have said obviously the cost of the tax relief of CCAs is a very large chunk. It's a lot of money that comes, is avoided, rightly I would say, but is that the most effective way of spending that money? It's up for debate. The consultation makes that quite clear. And then in terms of incentives, sorry, I've lost part of my sentence. Anyway, so Treasury is very open to what the incentives could be. So obviously you've got CCAs, that's a very big chunk, that's the biggest incentive. There are others as well. Obviously there's enhanced capital allowances. I think if you heard Helen's seminar this morning, she was talking about the electricity demand reduction pilot. That's another thing in terms of money that was available to help businesses be more efficient and lead to those reductions. It's not clear whether they'll remain, and what the consultation does make clear is that if people suggest that there are other incentives that might be better but will have a cost, any incentives will have to be funded through increased taxation. So you'll gain, if you think you can gain on one hand, someone else is going to be paying. So again, it's, when you're responding to the consultation, you've got to see it through that vision. Are you going to be able to benefit, or is it just a cost that's going to get smeared? And which is better, really? Oh, there you go. There's the rest of it. So in coming through increases in tax. And the last objective that they had, or the Treasury had, was to support productivity, to improve incentives for energy efficiency and carbon reduction. It's not clear to me whether you could do that just because the costs go up. Is that how they'll deliver it? It doesn't say. What we do know, and the final thing is, they do want to increase investment in the UK economy. Now, I'd like to say that they want to deliver energy efficiency investment, but I think investment per se, just needs to happen. There's got to be some spending going on in that. So, I'm afraid what we don't know, it's a slightly longer slide. And I couldn't fit it all onto the notes, I've written it down as well. So, what we don't know, and again, from our survey of customers, one of the comments that came back with was, to comply with each tax regime, it involves our time and cost to comply. Each successive government seems to make changes and introduce another form of tax. We need long-term continuity with a system that will endure future changes in government. Absolutely couldn't agree more. Couldn't tell you if that's actually what's going to come out of the back of this. So let's have a look at what we don't know, and at least that'll set the parameters for the rest of the debate. Okay, so we don't know what the level of investment or energy efficiency and carbon reduction they're expecting to achieve. The consultation says it wants to maintain the same levels, but again, there's no numbers. So will there be a difference in the focus? Will the carbon reduction come down? Is energy efficiency going to be more important? At a workshop on Monday, I asked the question point blank, what do you want to achieve? What's the policy objective? Is it energy efficiency and driving productivity through doing more with less? Or is it to meet our targets under carbon reduction? And there wasn't an answer. And I think there's this quite simplistic view. If you reduce your energy efficiency, you reduce the carbon. Unless that's true, but you could reduce your carbon through other ways as well, which isn't necessarily reducing your total energy. And which is more important? What do they want to achieve? And I thought it was quite telling that there wasn't an answer to that one yet. What we don't know, so to what extent will a single reporting and tax framework, how viable is it? There can't be a one-size-fits-all, because it'll either be too basic and not deliver any benefit, or so complicated you might as well stick to what we've got, because at least you know the complexity that you're facing. When will the changes be implemented? I think this is a big one, certainly for us, and I'll come on to it later, but I think the assumption is that CRC will go and be replaced with increased costs into CCL, which obviously supplies administered on the government's behalf. So obviously, if there's going to be changes that we'll have to implement from our systems, we need to know about it. Obviously, if you're going to have different changes coming, you need to know when they'll happen. And there isn't a date. Obviously, the announcement won't come out until 2016, so I think it's safe to assume it won't be in 2016, but could it be 2017? It could be. Then obviously you've got issues of, well, what happens with CRC participation and qualification? I think we need an answer when they're planning on doing it. They're also linked into when it will be implemented. The cost or the size of the revenue they're expecting to recover will go up each year as the cost of CRC increases. So is it currently the 800 million that it costs now, or will it be the 800 million plus the additional increase in carbon allowances which we would be expecting to see coming forward? Don't know. Couldn't answer me that one either. So which organisations will be impacted by how much? So obviously, if you get rid of CRC, the money is going to have to come from somewhere, and the assumption is that it will come from CCL. Not everyone pays CCL. Obviously, customers who are under the de minimis threshold don't pay it, so they're protected from those additional costs. But those at the large end who have a CCA, assuming they continue to the same degree, they'll be protected to an extent as well. And it'll be that middle chunk who may have a CRC agreement, who may not. How will they be affected, and to what extent? How will the costs get put out there? There are questions in the consultation. Should there be more on gas? Should there be more on electricity? Should there be more on coal and other fuel oils that come under CCL? There's no clarity on that. We don't know. Who's going to oversee and administer the scheme? So this might seem as a small point, but when I was thinking through this presentation, obviously at the moment it's the Environment Agency, and they cover all the other schemes as well. They've got ESOS, they cover CCAs, they cover CRC, EU ETS. There's a massive amount of expertise in there. So who will do it? Will it still be the Environment Agency? What are the implications? Will the schemes run concurrently? Just how will it work? I think it's one of the things that would be interesting to understand. As I said before, will there be a rebalancing between electricity and gas CCL costs? I think we've argued previously that at the moment policy costs on electricity, they're slightly skewed because of all the other costs in terms of decarbonising the grid are in the electricity, and that may or may not have led to a situation where there's not such a pressing need to decarbonise heat because costs on gas are less. But it doesn't give any indication. You might think that's a good idea, but unless they can say, well, we're thinking about maybe 1% here and 1% there, that's a very different proposition to 25% increase in gas and 25% off electricity, or 25% on coal. I think we need to have some numbers, and who would be affected, because obviously people who use gas just for heating maybe have different options as to those who use it for process. Will this reform and the costs, does it go beyond deficit reduction? Now, I didn't say it, and I should have done in my notes. One of the consultation back in 2012. Sorry, I'm going to cough. Hold on. They did make it clear when the revenue recycling was removed. Excuse me. That removing that, letting the money come back to customers, was going to be a high priority when finance is allowed. So there always was, we were all in it together. Business had to kind of pay its share, with the expectation that once the deficit had been reduced and we're all on more of an even keel, you either might get the revenue recycling coming through or the cost would come down. I don't think that's going to be the case. Is the question of how much money are they intending to raise, and is it always going to be this $1.5 billion that they want to get from businesses? Is that going to go up? And if so, how can you plan your investments to offset that? What level will it be? Okay. What incentives will be available? So obviously at the moment you've got CCAs, no guarantee that they'll continue in the same format. I think they will continue, but obviously there's a question, excuse me, past 2020 in the current agreements. Well, what's that going to look like? Will they change them then? Or if they do these changes earlier, and you've still got the investment framework for the next milestones if you're in a CCA agreement, what will happen to any plans that you'd got for that investment? And when I've spoken to customers, they're saying that a lot of the investment comes through as plant reaches its natural cycle, that you change and you do it then. So if you're expecting to replace your chillers or your heating systems and you'd schedule that in, if that's after the date that this changes, well, what impact will that have? Also, I don't think I've got it on a slide here, but the question is, well, what happens to those who've got mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reporting? It's mentioned in the consultation as a this is something that you have to do, but there are no implications of what they'll do with that. So will they look to excuse me, will they look to remove it? When I went back through in terms of the consultation into the mandatory greenhouse gas reporting, and when they decided they were just going to focus it on the listed companies, UK listed companies, they said in the consultation response back in 2013, in 2016 it would be reviewed to see whether it should be expanded to all large organisations. I'm guessing that's not going to happen, but it might. You know, it is one reporting tool that's out there. So again, it's just kind of watch this space. And if you are impacted by it, I didn't ask that question, but if you're impacted by mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reporting, that's something else that you may still have to do. So what might it mean? Single reporting framework, anyway. So on these slides, I'm hoping you can read it. So on the left, I tried to colour code these. So the ones in red, those are the critical ones. These are the ones that you're mandated you have to do if you're eligible. So you've got EU ETS, you've got CRC. If you're an ESOS participant, you have to do an ESOS assessment, slightly different from reporting, but we'll talk about that for now. And then in the amber, you've got the CCA reporting that you have to do. So whilst you have to do it to still maintain your CCL exemptions, it's a voluntary scheme at the end of the day. You know, you could choose not to do it if it was worth you are. And then obviously we've got ISO 50001, which is completely voluntary. You can choose to do it. If you choose not to do it, apart from a future impact on your ESOS, you know, government isn't going to make you change your mind. So what might a single mandatory reporting framework look like? So the consultation happily says it will be based or designed through the prism of ESOS, which is a bit odd, I thought, because ESOS hasn't actually completed. The deadline's 5th of December, and I think the last version or the last report I'd seen was, I think, 647 organisations have so far confirmed that they're compliant out of about 10,000. You know, there's a lot of companies, and from the straw poll, you're all on track to do it, which is fantastic. There's obviously a lot of people who aren't quite as well advanced, who may be looking for that extension or delay. But what is, because then the next thing they say is, well, the reporting should contain the most effective elements from existing reporting, which again makes sense. You don't want to put something stupid in there, but what do they consider the most effective elements? You know, it doesn't say what do they want to see. They ask for suggestions, but ESOS, what it reports on, is very different to what you report on under CRC and under CCAs. What is it that they want to know? And I think that's the question. What is the reporting for? Is it for government to get data? Is it to justify a future incentive or a future relief that you'd need to, you know, to demonstrate that you've done what you said you do, that you'd have this reporting? Or is it for you to take to your organisations, to your finance directors, to your boards to say, look, this is the cost that we've got. If we put these investments in, we can defray that and we can avoid future costs as well. So what's its purpose? They have said that they do believe, and I think the research that TaX published earlier in the year about CRC, that there are benefits in having board level reporting in terms of getting that, you know, making sure that you've got access to the board to give these business and investment cases. And I think it will be a factor of the new scheme in whatever shape or form it will be. So there's likely to be the board level sign off. And what we're hoping, and what we've certainly said in terms of what you need to make sure is that the organisational structure that will report is fit for purpose. So obviously in CRC and ESOS, there's a degree of you're forced to report in a certain structural way unless you de-aggregate. We'll make sure that people can report in a way that's sensible for their organisation, and you're not getting sign-off from people who aren't actually involved. So how that will actually in reality be possible to do, but you know, it's one of those things that we think, you know, should be considered. So, well, what's the implications? We do think it will reduce some duplication of effort, but it's not going to get rid of it all, because they've made clear, obviously, EU ETS is out of scope. ISO 50001 has nothing to do with them anyway, so there is still going to be some degree of duplication. And the question about, well, what does through ESOS mean? ESOS, obviously, you have to do it every 4 years, and it's the reporting and it's the audits and making sure, or understanding where the cost-effective improvements can be made. That's very different from reporting just on your potential, on your energy use or your carbon emissions. So what is it that they want to do? And what will it be used for? And I think we've just got to wait and see on that one. Haven't mentioned greenhouse gas emissions reporting because I generally don't know. Will they expand it? Will they get rid of it? Will it do both? When I've spoken to people, it's quite helpful for people, those who do it, who've got emissions abroad. but you're determining your own scope. So again, it's not measuring the same thing as you. You've got your own ability to decide what you're reporting on and to your best of your ability, and that's very different from it being a mandatory compliance-led scheme. So again, have to wait and see on that one. So then, and our little one from the survey basically said it's got to be better than the current system, which is all over the place and has lots of repetition, but often different calculations. And that's the one thing that we've also said on behalf of customers is, if you're going to have this scheme, can we please have a single set of calculations, a single set of carbon factors, so that you can plug your numbers in. It can be used for different purposes if government needs to calculate it on a different basis, but let the system do that. Let's not have to remember to make sure you've got the right version in there when you do it. Okay, so what might this mean for a single tax? This is probably the crux or the key one for many of you. And I'd love to be able to say I knew the answer, but I can't because I'd be lying. So, on the left again, we've got ones in red, EU ETS, the CRC obviously buying the allowances, CCL, for those who pay it, and then I've put CCA again because if you don't have it, you're paying it. It's technically an incentive rather than a tax. And then what might this mean from a single tax perspective? Well, I think it's 98% certain, and I'm hedging my bets here, that CRC will go and the costs will just be plonked into CCL somehow. Question about how much is, who will be protected, who will be paid, exemptions, but really I think that's what they want to do because it is seen as a simple or simpler solution, and suppliers, lucky us, will be administering on behalf of government, and we'll be collecting it. You'll see it on your bills, we'll pay it, and then we pay it across. They don't have to come up with a new scheme, anything like that. So I think that is what is going to happen. I think I've not heard anyone say, oh, do you know what, that's not a good idea, or we don't like that. So I think unless someone has got some really, really big objections and big justifications why that shouldn't be the case, if you have, say them, but I think that is what's going to happen. Will it provide the economic signal for that investment into energy efficiency and carbon reduction? I think this is where there's a bit of a question, because a lot of people I've spoken to have said, well, if it's on your bill, and your bill will go up, I mean, let's not kid ourselves, your CCL costs are going to increase substantially if you face them. Is that better? You get your monthly bill with your CCL costs on. Is that more likely to determine behaviour rather than one big cost of buying your allowances for CRC, where you've got to go to your finance director and say, oh, I need £100,000 to buy my allowances. I want to buy them in the forecast sale because it's a bit cheaper, then I'll do a top up. There's a real question, which is going to be more effective at getting people to say, oh, that's a really big chunk of money you're asking me for. Well, yes or no, rather than seeing it as sort of 10,000 a month, to wait and see on that one. Obviously, we'd hope it would. The purpose of this is to encourage. We think it shouldn't be about giving Treasury money. It should be about making sure that the right investment signals are there for businesses, and obviously not just businesses, but public sector too. What was I going to say? So we support that. Let's be clear, we do support that. What we are a bit concerned about, and it's probably not necessarily for the case for you in here, for those customers for whom electricity and gas or energy, I say, costs aren't their biggest priority. So the SME market, those who do qualify for CCL because they're above the minimum level, but management time and resource isn't focused on energy because they've got, frankly, bigger problems and bigger issues. It's more about their HR costs. I think we just need to be careful that they don't end up picking up the costs for those who are having their costs smeared across. So if you're in CRC, you think, fantastic, my costs are just going to get smeared across a much bigger population. I think we just have to be cognizant that some of that population might not be in a position to do very much about it. They might be in leased commercial properties, they might be able to change the fabric of the building, they might not, and they're not energy intensives. So unless they're looking to completely refurb, there's going to be a limit to what they can do. So we can't just stiff them with the higher costs to simplify for one group of customers at the expense of the others. So how that will be managed and that distributional impact, I don't think has been mapped out yet, or if it has, they've not published those numbers, and I think that's going to be very interesting. Another issue that we've pointed out to DEC and to Treasury is that gas and electricity and CRC are treated differently to CCL. So there's the obvious ones, obviously gas and CRC, if it's under the 2% de minimis, you don't count it. Well, if it's a like for like and it comes across, so you'll suddenly start paying for that. I think more interestingly is that obviously for power, if you've got the renewable generation and you've not claimed your ROCs or FITs, you still have to buy your allowance. You still have to have an allowance for that renewable generation because it's all about grid decarbonation rather than your specific site. We won't be able to bill that amount of money because that's what you do. We can't we won't be able to pass those costs on through CCL, or if we do, it'll just be, it will be an additional cost to one that you're currently paying. It's got to be calculated, and it was just the fact that they hadn't thought about it or hadn't realised. I was a bit concerned. So again, if you've not written your responses, you might want to stick that one in there. And then the last one, or there's a couple more actually. Obviously, qualification, depending on when they bring this in, qualification for phase 3 CRC is currently 2017 to 2018. Most people, if you've got your 5 to 8 class meters, they'll have gone through P272, and that'll go through. So if you were expecting to either reduce your consumption or maybe even be coming into it, you've got to factor in what are those costs that you were going to have, but you might not have in the future. And then the other thing, which I think was quite interesting, that again they hadn't thought about, is CRC, unless you're buying it from a trader, if you're buying it in the traded market, it doesn't incur VAT. CCL does. Okay, and they're like, oh, that's fine, everyone can claim it back. And I was like, well, no, not all businesses can. So are you going to be impacted if you can't, you're suddenly going to have an increase in your CCL costs and your associated VAT? And I did ask the question, this 800 million, if that's what it turns out to be, is that inclusive or exclusive of VAT? And they were like, oh. And I was like, oh, you want to think about that as well, because are you seeking to get an amount of money? And so how you cut it is, that's your discretion, or is it that amount of money plus the additional benefits on top that you'd not thought about? So we'll have to wait and see. Okay, and then from our survey panel, they said, I should say, I don't agree with these energy taxes, but if they are here to stay, they might as well be shown in one amount. And I think it's a valid comment, and it is just that question for your purposes when you're thinking about investment and getting those decisions. Is it more effective to have it all on one bill, spread out over the year, or does that one big chunk of cash focus people's minds? And that will be down to your specific organisations, and that's one for you to think about. Okay, so sorry, it hadn't come up right. So what could the customer impacts be? Are you feeling lucky? Are you? I think it's the question. Will your organisation, do you feel that your organisation might win or might lose? And I think that will be very much dependent. We'll factor into how you respond to this consultation. Do you think if you're in a CCA, you're going to be okay and that will continue? Excellent, if so, because you'll obviously be defraying the costs. But what if it isn't? What are the potential for changes to taxation on the different fuels? Are you more exposed to gas? Are you more exposed to power? Are you exposed to coal? I don't know. We don't know how they'll decide and cut those final costs. What will that mean for your investment decisions? What will you invest in? When will you invest it? What impact will that have on your business cases? Will you try and invest in low carbon heat while you can still? Or will that not be the best thing if you are just having it based on your energy costs, so on energy rather than carbon reduction costs? And I think, again, that's something you just need to have a think about. Do you have any banked CRC allowances or carrying forward CCOs? And if you do, I would strongly suggest that you use them up. They did say, Environment Agency did say this 2 years ago when the review was coming out, don't be holding on to it, I think is the, because we don't know when it will come through. And there is a question, when this first came out, we'd heard rumours that they were going to implement it from next year, and we were like, oh my goodness, we've just, obviously I've bought our allowances, oh my goodness, that's a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, bear that in mind. It could become a sunk. Are you currently using all of the available benefits that you have? So if you've got your CCA, some people obviously could have been in a CCA and may have come out for good reasons, may have had renewable energy that was exempt, may have chosen that. Is there now a benefit of going back into a CCA? Will you still be able to do that? Can you still do it? You probably want to think about that now. Are you using the available capital allowances scheme? Again, there's no indication whether that will continue. To what degree it's successful, I've asked the question, I've not had an answer. How much money does Treasury spend in terms of funding that? Could it be better spent? Is it a load? Is it, not very much at all? And if it's not very much at all, why not? Are people thinking about it? Again, some customers have said, it's just too complicated, it's too difficult, it's an accounting issue. I'm the energy manager, I want to get these things in place. It's not messing about with the numbers and claiming the tax back over the first year. So again, if your organisation has had those conversations, it might be just worth, over the next 2 years, seeing what you could do, if anything, because it might not be there. It might well be. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you're going to lose the opportunity, but there's no clarity at the moment, so it's just worth thinking about. Okay. So, how do you prepare? Don't panic. I think it's the first one. Although, if you see me when I first saw the conversation, I was thinking, oh my goodness, how do you respond? I don't know. But don't panic, because there are lots of things you can do. You need to consider, do you think your organisation is at risk or not? Are you likely to be disadvantaged? If you're one who has a CRC and thinks, oh, actually, I'm not going to have as much complex reporting, my costs might go down because they're smeared, well, you might actually think, brilliant, excellent. As long as you know where you stand, you need to have thought about it. You need to respond for those who haven't yet responded to the consultation. Really, I'd recommend very strongly that you do, because it is going to result in a very, very big change to the business energy market, not just for business, but for public sector as well. Or just highlight concerns to Treasury, to HMRC, to BIS and to DEC. They're very open to it. There's lots of email addresses where you can send comments to. I know they've still got stakeholder engagement events going on. There's one being held tomorrow. So, they're not just sitting there thinking, well, they've all done and dusted, the decisions made. It is still very open. Think about your investment drivers and how these might be impacted. Are you considering energy efficiency as a strategic investment and a strategic cost? Because if you're not, you probably should. And this is a great opportunity to have those discussions again with your board. Obviously, with ESOS coming up, that's another area, but it's, you need to focus your minds and work out what you can do. And then I'd say, obviously, speak to us about opportunities for energy solutions. I would say stay here. I don't know what the time is, but very soon there's going to be another seminar on why solutions, not products, are the answer. That will give you an indication of what is available, what you can do. And, I think watch the space. So does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, it's just a bit of a jumble of thoughts, but the consultation, if anyone's read it, is very much like that. So, questions? There's a stunned silence. Oh, hang on. He's going to bring it back up.
Thank you. Just a comment. Just can you hear me? Yeah. Just a comment to add to what you said earlier about the timing of when we might hear anything. I had a conversation with Treasury Tuesday, and there was no indication we'd hear anything earlier than March, which kind of backs up what you said, that you thought that was unlikely.
Yeah, I think that's right. They have said, there might be high-level responses in the comprehensive spending review. So there might be responses, some high-level ones in the comprehensive spending review, because at least at that stage we should know what's likely to be happening, what DEC's focus is going to be. And I think the reset speech should also give some indication, at least, is it carbon? Is it energy efficiency? What is it they want to do? But you're right, I don't think there'll be... Sorry, I should have said, the budget in March will give the response. There'll be then another consultation on the actual technical, well, how will it actually be made to be implemented? And I think if you've not responded to this one, definitely keep a lookout for that one. And I'm sure, from Empower with your business development managers or through us, we'll certainly be looking at that in detail, because I think that's where the devil is going to come out, where you may be affected, where you won't be. So keep an eye out for that one as well.
Just a question around qualification. Has there been any sort of indication at the talks with BIS or with Treasury around what businesses are going to be captured into the new single tax? For example, at the minute with CRC, it's 6,000 megawatt hours for qualification. I mean, is it going to be a threshold set in terms of kilowatt hour consumption, or is it going to be similar to ESOS, where you have to give a notification to the Environment Agency to say, yes, we meet the qualification criteria, and then we're complying with the scheme, and then you sort of do it yourself? Then the problems around that then come along. Like, for example, I'm with Balfour Beatty, and we have a lot of construction, and we don't always have the luxury of our partners and JV partners joining our group procurement, electricity and gas contracts. So there's a lot more complexity around who's in, who's out, and how it's going to be captured in terms of compliance audits.
Okay, so I think that's absolutely a critical question. Don't have the answer. I would say everyone who's currently charged CCL will be impacted, because I think the costs are going to come across. In terms of the reporting, and this is where it's very, very open, because the consultation makes clear they do want it to be on the basis of ESOS, which, as you say, obviously just impacts large organisations. Public sector aren't in it, public sector for the reporting. And because they're not clear on what the purpose of that would be, they may well set some criteria, some threshold criteria for the reporting. Will they still allow people to sign off your own ESOS? Or if that's part of it, can your energy manager do it if they're suitably qualified? I don't know. But I think if you pay CCL, you're going to be captured, I suspect, in terms of the cost. And the reporting is a separate issue. And I think that's where it would be quite interesting, because they had suggested tangentially and not saying it explicitly, you could do the change to the tax first and then the reporting secondary, because obviously changing the reporting is going to be a much bigger job, because you want to get it right, because that's where the complexity is. Whereas moving the money around and getting us to collect it rather than paying for it, whilst not easy, don't get me wrong, it's still going to be very difficult to do, is a simpler change than designing on a whole new scheme and getting it laid and getting it sorted out. So I'm afraid I can't give you an answer on the qualification, but if you pay CCL, you'll be impacted, I think, would be fair to say. Okay.
Simon Lee from Hampshire County Council. At the moment, education is excluded from the CRC, but they do pay CCL. Do you feel that education will come back into paying their carbon tax?
I think at this stage, then yes. If they get rid of the CCR, if they get rid of the CRC, smear the costs, then CCL, you'll start to pick it up again. And there is just then that question. Obviously, they did take it out, and there was other mechanisms to try and get, educational establishments particularly to take more steps. Whether they will look to do something similar, I don't know. My gut feel would be it's about the money. So if they can get it in, they will. And that might be a case for, should there be additional incentives specifically targeted for that sector? And that's one of the questions that they're asking, how can you do it? What will incentivise people to do it? Because if they haven't got the cost, or if they have got the cost, what can they then defray those costs with, other than you avoid the cost by doing something? But it's a really important question, because if you're not paying it now and you suddenly think, I might actually get other people's costs coming back in, there's something you need to prepare for and at least to take an account of. But it's definitely worth a question asking them. We all done? Oh.
In the last round, whenever they changed CRC, there was some technologies which were discounted, such as CHP, which obviously had a huge financial impact on some organisations, and also with the CHPQA scheme, you're discounted from, you don't have to pay CCL on that. Has there been any discussion around technology specific?
No.
Because obviously it's huge financial implications for technologies such as that. I know renewables obviously looks like it's going to come back in the CCL, but for something like that, which is obviously very heavily dependent on within industry and large kind of in healthcare as well.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know in terms of how they will manage it, because again, it's that question, well, what costs do they want to come across? How will they protect? And how will they arrange it? Don't know, I'm afraid. But again, write it in your consultations, what will this mean? I mean, particularly when they took away the Lex, there's a Conservative majority, and it's very much on the focus of it being affordable. Making sure that they get their money in, I think, is going to be the key consideration. So if there are sectors, particularly CHP, in terms of future investment as well, that's, I think, why we need to know, is it carbon reduction or is it energy efficiency, and what is it that will then get tackled? It's a valid question, I'm afraid I don't have the answer. So I think we're pretty much out of time now. Thank you all for listening. Much appreciated.